Hi, I'm Jane Smith-Patterson, the president of Rural Telecom, and I'm going to just say a few words, and then we're going to move straight into the panel. We have a lot of really great presentations today that I think you'll find really interesting, and I hope you'll take a look at all of these. We will have a break, as you know, for the Cornerstone Award Luncheon, and that's going to be in Grand Ballroom 8 at 12:45. And I don't think I'll release the secret, but they are, for the first time, giving an award back to their first award for community broadband because it's done so well. And that will be a person you saw him present in here yesterday. Their organization will get that award. So you will find that interesting, I think. We have a lot of super presentations, and please, I'm going to pass around a form, and I'd ask you to fill out your name and address. If you did so yesterday, you don't need to do it today, okay? You won't have to re-sign. But we want to keep track of everyone that's in here. And at the end of the day, Frank Odas from Montana is sitting over here on the right, one of our board members, and he has been recording these. And we're going to put the presentations and also the recording, and assuming he's any good, okay, Frank, you'll be able to get a good shot at it, but at least you'll have the slides as well. So this morning, Jason Whittet, who didn't slip away.
He did.
Jason Whittet is our board member. He was originally the Massachusetts Broadband Director, and now is with IDC in New York. And you can read all the presenters have their information in here. I don't want to in any way take any time away from them, except to say that we've vetted everyone who's presenting. They are really authentic. They can answer your questions, and I would encourage you to keep in touch with the people who are on today. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you off and on during the session. So Jason, I've already introduced you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning. How's everybody doing? Did you have fun last night? Well, thanks for coming out this morning. You've chosen very well. This is going to be a great panel, and we're here to talk about successes, lessons from rural broadband deployments, and I think it's really timely. I think many of you know about some of the recent announcements, Broadband USA and the rise of the definition of broadband at 25 megabits, and according to the White House, 53% of the country that remains unserved is rural areas. So, really, it's 2015. If you're in a rural area and you're unable to get broadband, it's pretty much a problem. It's not going to fix itself. And these are folks who have successfully found ways to deploy broadband in these rural areas, and hopefully we can learn from them today. Before I start, I just wanted to say thank you again to Broadband Communities for having us here. It's a great event. Love coming every year. And thank you to the sponsors who so generously fund this and allow us to come together and talk about all the things that we do here. So to get started, I'll introduce the panel, and then our format, we're not going to do presentations. We're going to try and have a kind of facilitated conversation and walk through kind of the steps of stages of the project deployment, and hopefully be able to tease out some of the lessons that you can then take back to your communities. So I'm going to start over here. Haase is from the NTUA, the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority. And go ahead, right? 27,000 square miles. So I think that's just a massive part of our country. And I'm really excited that Wally's here. If you look at the remaining unserved areas in the country, the Native American reservations are a big part of that. I don't think they get the attention that they deserve. And so I think having Wally here to talk about his work there and really highlight what needs to be done to make sure that we get this important part of our country served. Tony Wilhelm, any of you that have been around the broadband space probably know Tony. Tony has been front and center with broadband through the federal stimulus and the creation of ETOP and the deployment of that $4.7 billion that have really helped build the middle mile infrastructure around the country that's supporting a lot of the last mile. So thank you for coming as well. And then Mr. Reyes from Carson. I think you've been in the general manager for 20 years and just successfully built a $60 million fiber network around New Mexico, one of probably the most beautiful, part of the most beautiful rural areas in the country. So thank you for coming as well. And then Mark Dzwonczyk from upstate New York. And I love that Mark is here. I think Mark, I definitely can say this, but kind of like an accidental broadband guy, great entrepreneur who saw an area that needed to be served and said, let's do this. And now is running Nicholville telephone and SLIC network. And this is one of the key takeaways from today. In order to have a successful broadband network, you really have to have a cool name. So if you look at a 3-ring binder, Mo Broadband, and then SLIC, which is St. Lawrence.
St. Lawrence Internet Connect.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for coming.
Sure.
And then also from New York, Angela Leota, who is with the New York State Broadband Office. And another key takeaway, if you want to have a successful broadband office, you want to make sure your governor likes you. If your governor doesn't like you, you're not going to be able to do a whole lot. If your governor does like you, they do what Governor Cuomo does, and they fund you with $500 million and say, go figure out this all broadband, rural broadband to provide in your state. So I think hopefully she'll bring a lot of lessons on how to run a great state broadband program. So I thought to kick it off, let's, so we've come through a great 5-year period. We've had the National Broadband Plan's 5 years old this year. We've had the federal stimulus. Now we have Broadband USA, Connect America Fund, FirstNet. And for folks you've all done so. Any just quick wins, lessons, things that you would love to change? We had Tom Wheeler here yesterday. I think we have some folks from the NTIA. Any like regulatory policy, the little definitions in the RUS or things that we could change that would make your lives easier? Anything you'd love to kind of see change?
Yeah, I'd love to see change the right-of-way process. When you have to go through the federal process. Any Native American tribe has to go through a whole NEPA process, anything they do through sexual tribal land, it's actually federal land. So going through that process is extremely difficult, long, and when you did the broadband project, they actually made us get the rights of way for everything we built before we could start building anything at all. So that was a big restriction. If they would allow us to at least start the process and start building things as we got rights of way, it would have been a lot better. The other thing that I think needs to be changed is with the FCC itself. They're not very responsive in a lot of areas, especially when you do filings. We have a very complex system, and I'll talk about it later, but we went out to get eligible telecommunication carrier status by federal law. It's supposed to take 9 months. We projected it was going to cost about $100,000. It took us more than 3 years to get the license, and it cost us $1.5 million to get the license. And a lot of places can't wait, don't have the tenacity to go through the process. But you need to have the other businesses to make broadband work. It has to be more than one business stream. And I have to talk to that too.
Anybody else want to?
I'll just add to that. So that's one of the things that we hear all the time in New York is the make ready, the rights of way, the pole attachments. I think equally as important to the funding is some kind of solving some of these challenges that we face with those make ready expenses and process. And one of the things that we're doing in New York as part of the New York program, which is a $500 million program that Jason had mentioned, is we are looking at all those processes. We're looking at how we can streamline, how we can make those processes simpler, easier, speed to deploy, less expensive, etc. So it's one of the things our office is working on as well.
And I can actually attest to it. So working in New York, we're actually out on the edges and throughout someplace called the Adirondack Park in upstate New York. And if you're familiar with the Adirondacks, it's actually larger. It's a private, public managed park. It's actually protected by the state constitution that will be forever wild. And we actually had to there's legislation to change to actually have a constitutional amendment so we can actually dig in forest preserve areas that is protected. But we've done great when people say we need to have broadband. We're working with the Department of Transportation and the Department of Environmental Conservation to actually get the waivers we need. I know you were tongue in cheek, you got to have your governor's support, but when you have state support to really make it a priority effort, that really makes a difference. We've seen tremendous, really, it's in the state constitution that you can't dig in these areas, and it's really nice to know we're going to figure out ways around those.
Yeah, and I would extend that also the federal rights of way to both Forest Service and BLM. The electric co-op already had rights of way, and the stimulus we were made to get the rights of way again, really do the study. And we had already disturbed it, we had poles, and it did hold up the process. In fact, we had already been funded, started to build, and then they stopped us. And that really did delay some of our time.
Jason, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think all the comments are, I think, indicative of just how complex, some of these rural build-outs can be. And, I don't think we want to gloss over that there's some magic bullet that all of a sudden is going to make this sort of an easy enterprise, So I think the comments suggest is, really having an organizational team with the expertise and talent to be able to navigate, which tends to be a slog. These things are multi-year, multi-million-dollar, complex. You have to project manage, you have to get your stakeholders together, you have to understand the regulatory environment that you're dealing with. And that takes a team in place, that really can navigate that process. And I think it tends to be a public-private partnership. Sometimes when we talk about municipal broadband, I think what's missing sometimes is having a good partner or partners in place that can really work with you to navigate and get through this process. And when we funded over 100 broadband projects at NTIA, and many of them through municipal endeavors, and I think that was a real challenge sometimes. Is in smaller communities you don't always have the expertise in place to manage all the issues that we're hearing already at the table. And they're not going to go away. I know we can get more streamlined, absolutely. But I don't see those going away anytime soon. So you really need the team in place to be able to get your community through this. It really amounts to a slog. It's a hard-fought process.
You have one more? Okay. So let's go on to the next step. So obviously, if you want to go and build a network, one of the big things you think about immediately is funding. And I know there's been some other panels on funding here, so I don't want to get into it too deep. But for folks that have borrowed money or have accepted grants from the federal government, have looked at Connect America Fund or have looked at state programs, any feedback from what works, what doesn't work, what people should think about as far as before you go and sign the contract, things you might want to think about, or any thoughts on how to effectively use these programs?
Just so you kind of get a real brief understanding. The Navajo Nation is 27,000 square miles. It's in 3 states. The state of West Virginia is 25,500. So it's larger than the state of West Virginia. We have a 52% unemployment rate, and it's not because people don't want to work, it's because of the environment. We have about 175,000 tribal members that live on the nation at any given time. We have about 300,000 tribal members in the whole Navajo Nation in the United States. So kind of give you some ballpark numbers. We run a multi-service utility. I have 40,000 electric customers. I have about 55,000 homes. So I currently have about 15,000 families that still don't have access to electricity, which represents about 75% of the families in the United States that don't have access to electricity live within the Navajo Nation. My organization covers about 25,000 square miles of the 27,000 square miles, so we have some investor-owned little pieces here and there, or large pieces. The reason I bring this up is when now you look at those numbers and you say, okay, now I've got about 20,000 folks who don't have running water in their house, because I have 40,000 electric customers, I have 35,000 water customers, I have about 16,000 wastewater customers, I have 8,000 natural gas customers. We have incumbent phone companies that service the area traditionally. One is called Frontier. And because of the cost structure and other things, it only provided landline phone services to about 40% of the homes. So 60% of the homes in the Navajo Nation do not have a landline phone in them at all, which obviously means you have no working emergency 911 system. Okay. So it kind of layers the understanding of everything that's out there. And the reason I bring this up is because we focused our grant on unserved areas and underserved areas, even though we had incumbents out there. Okay? And while our grant was centered on broadband initially, we knew before we went into the grant situation that we needed a partner to drive the economics to make it work, because the density's not there and the dollars aren't there. So we had a $43 million project and we got a $32 million grant. So we still needed, it was actually $46 million, so we still needed $14 million. And then we knew there would be cost overruns because you couldn't design and look at all the poles. There were significant cost overruns related to the bank grant. So It's a very complex system. It was only fiber, it was microwave, and it was a broadband, but it's very important to have a business partner that can be an anchor tenant that you can build your platforms off of. And that you have to be able to diversify the way your businesses are laid out, which I'll kind of talk about later. But the only reason we were able to pull this off is because we're a rural utility entity, and we were able to use RUS funding, where you borrow money from the federal government, which the co-ops do and others do. And that was to be able to do our balance. So that's where we were able to get some of the $14 million we needed. And that's also where we were able to pay for the cost overruns. Without having that secure source, the project would have failed because we would have been undercapitalized through the processes. So it's real important to identify, your funding sources, making sure they're substantial, making sure you have the reserves necessary to do the project. But it's also important to make sure that you have the business relationships set up in advance to be able to have the anchor tenants so that you have at least the revenue streams to make the thing work.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to?
As far as, so the co-op got a loan grant through the stimulus, but we've always, probably since about 2000, we've been running fiber in our neutral on the electric grid anyway. So we already had a vision of at least connecting our substations and doing a smart grid. Then we converted that so we could go to commercial for broadband. So we did have in place a strategy that the electric would finance some of the fiber deployments. The other thing that I think is going to help us going forward financially is the open access, allowing, in fact, competition, if you want to say, on the network, but they'll pay to get on. And I think that's another revenue stream, including the incumbent. So the big incumbent in our area is probably going to get on our network, and we think that will create both a competitive environment, but also give the co-op some cash flow to continue to extend its network.
So we're really, well, when I joined Nicholville Telecom about 4 years ago, we were a very small rural ILEC incumbent carrier, probably doing $2 to $3 million a year revenue, and we received a $35 million RUS grant loan program for 3 years. And I don't think the management team there recognized that that meant the cash flow every month was going to be the cash flow that we were doing every year. And so it's cash flow management. It's a different order of magnitude to think about. So managing that in terms of lessons learned, having different sources of cash as reimbursements come in. This isn't, remember, the RUS doesn't deposit $35 million in our bank and wish us luck, right? We have to submit for reimbursements, and they've been very supportive of that. Relatively timely in terms of getting the federal programs getting us supported, but you have to plan that cash flow, and it's different. It's just a world of difference. The other part that for us, the encumbrances as a private company, the loans from the RUS are really they really limit what we can do until we've actually paid off. And these are 30-year loans, and that's from running a private business. It's hard to say, well, we can't. For instance, we can't even go get a sizable line of credit or another kind of external investment without recognizing those assets that are encumbered by the loans from the RUS. So that's actually limits our flexibility, and we're trying to get those loans paid off as quickly as possible so that we can actually make more fluid and practical decisions. So it's cash flow in the short term, but it's also long term. How do you deal with the encumbrances on your assets?
Just add to what Mark was saying. For us, we have about $70 million right now that our governor has committed to broadband grants, and how that went out the door was a traditional RFP process. People applied, they indicated where they wanted to build, they were evaluated, and they were awarded. That process to get those out the door is very to get the funding out the door, it's a reimbursement process, very time consuming. It could take upwards of a year going through our state. So when we're looking at our new model under New York, we're backing into a very aggressive timeline, which is a 4-year universal broadband service. So one of the things that we're looking at is to ensure that we can get money out the door quickly, that it's, because it is an aggressive timeline, we don't have, a year or a year and a half to wait to be able to get the money out the door to the providers.
Yeah, so our company focuses on community anchor institutions. We serve about 1 million students across the country and have one of the largest rural healthcare networks in Pennsylvania. And, I wanted to focus for a minute on the reforms that are happening at the FCC around the E-rate and Healthcare Connect programs. But I think there's no reason now, moving forward with all the reforms, that we can't get ultra-fast broadband to our anchor institutions in our rural communities. There's no hurdles anymore. The FCC has changed the rules, I think, so significantly that when you look at things like capital costs, they've allowed partners to come in and actually state partners to be able to pick up, some of those expenses on the front end through beginning next year. They're allowing self-construction of networks, both for hospital consortia as well as schools. Interested in dark fiber, now that's eligible beginning in 2015. Whereas before you could do lit services but not dark fiber. So that even the playing field with dark fiber, which I think creates huge opportunities in rural communities. And they've changed the amortization rules so you can actually get payback immediately versus amortizing large investments over at least 3 years. And allowed for installment plans if you're a rural school district and still can't afford the non-discounted part of the E-rate, you can now create an installment plan with your service provider and pay that back over at least 4 years. So I think the rules of the game have changed so dramatically with E-rate, and I really encourage all of you to, understand the new rules and work with your school districts and your hospitals to use these funds to bring high-speed connectivity into the institutions. And we put out a couple of white papers. If you just Google my last name, which is right there, and put in like E-rate 2.0 or E-rate 2.1, our white papers will pop up, and we're happy to work with you all as a private partner to get that connectivity into the rural areas.
Thank you very much. All right, so I'm a community, I've got a town, I'm a rural town, and I'm saying, sir, I want to figure out how to tackle this. Can we maybe talk about when you're looking at parts of your territory and you're trying to figure out if you're going to make a deployment, where it makes sense, and what are the considerations from the business model to, is it going to be sustainable, is it going to be take rate with customers, how am I going to, roll this out? Can we talk a little bit about the process you use, the plan for that? What kind of, if you use consultants, if you have models or templates or things that you use, things that might be helpful to folks that they're trying to do the same thing.
I think for a co-op, a little bit different. When we started the process back in really '99, we asked our members, what is it that you want the co-op to do, given that the electricity markets are changing? And they actually came up with the idea of internet and economic development, which today really do tie in directly with each other. So in the co-op setting, the co-ops were formed to serve the non-served electrically. So we had already kind of come to, that's why we were created, is because no one wanted to serve the rural areas. The same, so when the broadband came up, the community really just asked the board, can you help us get broadband in areas that the incumbent isn't getting us the service, or is not going to get us the service in the future? And so we basically took the electric co-op model that you serve everybody. In essence, you socialize some of the rates, and there are some subsidies. The anchors are important because the big customers will take care of the low and fixed income. And so that's really how we got into it, basically on the electric model. And it's worked for 70 years. We've been able to serve all the members who want electricity. And co-ops are affordable. We can't say we're the cheapest, but rural areas now are electrified. We think the next part of our mission is now to offer broadband under the same co-op model to all the members of the co-op that want broadband.
Yeah, we're rather unique, just because of the land mass. And one of the statistics I can give you is we have 52% unemployment. We also have a per capita income of $10,900 a year, and the rest of the United States is at $49,000 a year. So we have to be very cost conscious, and we are physically a co-op hybrid muni. Is really the way we get our funding, depending on where we are. So we recognized that we needed to have more than just a product that we were going to serve to our customers because they couldn't afford it. So when we looked at how we did things, we originally engaged all the communications companies within the Navajo Nation, which are multiple companies, and we worked through a process with them trying to share assets and do things, and the answer to what happened at the end was 6 out of the 7 fell out of the process and said, at the last minute, we don't want to do this because it doesn't make sense for us. One company that was very, very small stayed with us in the process, and they are connected politically and economically to a very large company throughout the United States, and they're a mobile phone carrier. So what we ended up doing is we looked at multiple platforms. So when we built our middle mile on our grant, our middle mile consisted of 550 miles of fiber, all the electronics to light it, 200 additional miles to get connected up to Albuquerque, and then a very robust microwave network that are located on towers. So we had to put up 60 links with microwaves to get to the outer areas to be able to do broadcast. We built 32 towers, and we ended up with 59 total. And we bought 43 broadcast stations that go on the towers to be able to connect the broadband to the people. But what we also did is we lit all the other towers and those same 43 towers with broadband. We lit them up so that we could provide a roaming network for mobile carriers. So we actually provide services for AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, and we're a secondary carrier for T-Mobile. We have a primary service out there called SPI or Cellular One that covers a lot of areas. And what we knew we were going to do is we knew the broadband wasn't going to work on its own. It just isn't the dollars. There's a lot of E-rate opportunity for us in those things that we believe in healthcare, but we knew that it would take years to get into those markets just because of the way things work. So that's why we created an actual phone company where we're a mobile phone provider on the Navajo Nation. We got the FCC license through ETC. We opened up shop in April. We have over 14,000 mobile phone customers right now. And a majority of those customers are Lifeline customers, which are subsidized by the Universal Service Fund. And the reason why this is all important is because this creates a significant revenue stream that helps us provide the dollars to be able to do the things that we need to do. And what's really important is our community is creating jobs. So believe it or not, this middle mile, which is 100% owned by the Navajo people, and the last mile, which is 51% owned by the Navajo people, now has over more than 100 employees working. It took us 3 years to build, and there's a lot of people who built it, a lot more employees working on it, but there's over 100 permanent jobs right now that didn't exist in a place that had a 52% unemployment rate. And more importantly, it provided an outlet for a lot of our artists and a lot of our people who create unique items to be able to sell them over the internet to provide additional income to those low-income folks. Getting them a resource for their business, for the jewelry that they create, different things like that. So when we look at areas, we recognize that you have to have a consistent revenue stream. You can use some support from the electric utility and some of the others to get yourself off the ground, but you really have to look at the business models and take advantage of all the opportunities. And one of the biggest, most significant things we didn't take in consideration at the beginning was the roaming business. But the roaming business is tremendously large for us. So it's a business that's lessons learned.
Yeah, there are a lot of great resources out there on planning, for this. I'm not even going to pretend to know as much as, Joanne Hovis and Chris Mitchell and John Tonker, and these are all people that really can talk about that, and they have great resources on their websites. The Institute for Local Self-Reliance and Joanne CTC.us. John Hunter's here in the hotel, so these people really understand how to plan. But from my experience, having funded over 100 projects, there are really 3 important ingredients that you need to know considerations when you look at planning and bring in the right talent and the right ingredients for success. And those are, as I mentioned earlier, without the organizational capacity, it's not going to work. You have to have the right people at the table at the beginning to really have a strong chance of success. And that means people who know how to build, manage, and operate networks. You know, you can't pretend to know those things. You really need to have experience in doing those things, without which I think a project has not a great chance of success. And then a financial business plan. You gotta look toward long-term sustainability, long-term success. So understanding the business plan, I think, and having the right people to do that is critically important. And then the technical component, really creating a scalable, resilient network for the long term. And again, technology changes, a lot of different vendors out there. It's easy to miss on that one as well. So without any one of those, I think, can really derail your project. So when you think about planning, make sure you've thought about those three big elements. Have the right people at the table, the right partners, in order to really take that into your plan from the beginning.
I just say something. Part of it is you learn as you go. You know, we knew how to build electric, we knew how to get through right-of-way processes, but we didn't run or manage a communications company. So I want to be clear on that, you know, we had some infrastructure in place, we had to learn and grow a lot of it. I want to give a great compliment to NTIA who provided significant funding with us. Their project management team really worked hard to help us get through the processes. They recognized that the opportunities for economics or sustainability on the nation are very, very low relative to the economy, the unemployment rate, and other things like that. So they worked on helping us. They worked on trying to expedite things to get things done. So I'm grateful for the things that they were able to do for us to go through the processes. It could have been a lot more difficult to manage had they not tried to reach out and the extra effort to keep us going forward in the right path. So I just want to say thank you.
Absolutely. And any thoughts over here?
So, go ahead, please.
So what I think I heard the gentleman on the other side of all of them saying is that, you know, partnerships, I think, is the key to building your partnerships, developing these relationships. That's what we see when we go to these communities. One of the things that we've also done is, you know, we visit many communities, they don't even know where to start. They don't know who to call, who to contact, who could be their broadband champion. So we developed a toolkit, which we published and we developed it last year, released it last year, and it's basically a guide that will help guide you from start, you know, where do I start to through deployment. So our communities have been telling us they've been using it, it's been very helpful. So, you know, if you haven't seen it, or if you're thinking about how to get started, you can always look at it or think about developing your own to meet your own needs.
And we did about 800-mile fiber expansion, and we happen to have a secret weapon in our company. The president and CTO of our company actually did the planning himself, got in the truck, rode around. Having feet on the street, knowing your local community was really important. But two lessons that we took away, one is you can't just give the oil to the squeaky wheel. You give the oil to the squeaky community if they were willing to band together. But there's always going to be someone who thinks they can write a bigger check. So if you just get the network to my house, that doesn't work, that doesn't scale. And the second part is, even though you're bringing broadband to the unserved. So I'm from Silicon Valley and built some tech startups, and of course you want broadband. Why wouldn't you? And the assumption that you're going to get very high penetration is just not going to happen for the first couple of years. So we're seeing 40 to 45% penetration. These are people who've never don't have the base. They go from, as a telephone company, we provide them dial-up service. So they go from 56K to 100 meg, and we get about 40% take rate at the beginning. So you just gotta build that into your financial model. Just even though I certainly understand how could you live without this? People have been living without it for decades. So you can't just make that assumption that just because I like it, everyone will understand it. And then it's an adoption. And we're seeing it in the second pass and the third pass. And unfortunately, you can't get people to sign up through Facebook because they don't have, broadband. You can't have a Facebook group to say, get your broadband. So we actually put lawn signs in people's yard. Just like it won't look like political signs, but I just got my high-speed internet, and then, oh, you got it, and some people put balloons, and I'm the last one on the street to get it, and that's actually physically letting people see this broadband in your community. It's really, so it's got to be a patient effort, 3 to 4 years to get to 70, 75% penetration.
You want to say anything? Okay. So let's go to the next step. So construction, I think everybody mentioned some of the challenges with pole attachments, rights of way, make ready, all of those things. Any tips, any lessons you learned in building your networks on how to plan for that construction, how to stage, how to get through make ready maybe a little bit easier, how to line things up so that it all flows and maximize your time and get things done? Any thoughts on how, what folks should look out for, just some of the traps of
We did a mix in our network. I'm sorry, Mike, we did a mix in our network of both contract out some of the work, and we actually had, this was for Telecom, we had our own line crews and trucks, and actually that was a good use of a good mix of resources to actually do some of it ourselves, and because that way we knew the network, but use contractors to fill in when we needed a lot of extra work done in the short term, or contract out a large part of the network. Here, just go do this build. If you're outsourcing it, though, you got to have an internal QA person really following up. You can't just, it's just like good project management in general, but you have to have someone out climbing the poles and doing the QA actually in the field. You'd be amazed how much, it's really just about communication on project. It's not that the contractor's trying to get away with anything, that something got miscommunicated somewhere in the print or something. And you gotta, if you're gonna contract out, you really have to have your own internal checks and balances. You can't contract that stuff out.
We actually, we started the process trying to do some of the in-house. My biggest thing that hit us was our make-ready costs. Our make-ready costs, originally in the grant estimated to be $2 million, we actually spent $15 million on make-ready. And the reason for that was, for a long time, some of the maintenance was being deferred in the utility, so that there was a larger buildup. So when we actually went out to do the original design, our original designers didn't go out and specifically look at all the lines, or look at the majority of lines and come up with a matrix of how much they thought make ready would be. They just used an industry standard. That doesn't work real well. You can end up creating a problem. We started out doing some of that work in-house, and then we basically, we have a very large workforce. There's probably at that point in time, we probably had about 550 employees in the various disciplines. But we found that our normal work routines and the other things that we're doing were suffering, so we went very, very heavy in contracting. We basically ended up contracting everything out. We trained our crews how to maintain and operate and to do the things that they needed to do, but at the end of the day, we wouldn't have been able to meet our timelines had we realized that early. So we got 6 months into the process and realized that this isn't going to work. It needs to be more contracted out. So we went full board on contracting out, not only the make ready and the pole work, and that we also had to build towers and landing equipment on the towers and things like that. So it was a different job.
Yeah, and I really think it's project management. So just imagine our project where we have 2,900 miles to build. About 2,000 of it is aerial, 900 is underground, and we're doing make ready at the same time. And we have 3 years to do it. And so we have to use a lot of contractors. And I think the project management at the higher level and the integrator, we were fortunate to bring in a company like Fujitsu that helped us get all these moving parts, because it really is having a bunch of balls in the air and hoping that none fall. But we did, in the end, rely heavily on their management expertise and on outside contractors. There's no way we would have built it if we tried to do internal stuff. What we did do through this arrangement, though, is then we helped our internal crews get the skill sets they needed to maintain it going forward. Because it is a big system now that is going to have to continue to operate. So I do think it was the integration and the project management that will carry a project to success.
I'll just add to that. I'm also looking at existing assets that are out there. In New York State, we have a significant amount of fiber that runs through the whole state up and down our thruway. And right now, there's some challenges with accessing it. But it's unused assets that are out there, and I'm sure Mark can add to this. But utilizing existing assets that already exist. If fiber is exists in an area, look at partnering with the fiber provider in that area. And I know Six, worked with ION and a number of different organizations there.
Yeah, we do a lot lot of fiber swaps in areas where someone built out something already, but they want to get in certain areas or really want long-term IRUs with the middle mile providers. So one thing that Jason and I had is sort of related, but Louis talked about getting something done in 3 years. So when I arrived, it was a 3-year program, $35 million. They had a great Gantt chart of going to take, exactly 35 and a half months. It's a perfect plan. And I said, bring it in. I want it cut in half. I want everything done in 18 months. And they thought I was crazy. But I was like, but if we don't plan for that, we're not going to make it. You're not going to get up. It's the 80-20 rule, and you're not going to get 80% of that work done in the last 2 weeks. And so that was and part of the cultural change was, but wait, we have 3 years to spend this money. And I was, no, we're trying to build a business on this. Let's go get all those customers in the first 18 months and get this business ramped up. So that took a lot of cultural thinking of not just, here, we're going to stay at what can we get done in 3 years? It's, if we didn't, the RUS didn't say you have to take 3 years to spend money. They said you have to make sure it's a 3-year program. And so it was just it took about 4 weeks of me hitting that mantra. We're pulling the schedule in by 18 months. They thought I was absolutely crazy. But we did it in about 24. Most of our build was done in about 24. And now we actually still have a couple million left in there, and we're trying to figure out what we have 3 or 4 months left on this project. And it's actually finding those last customers to go spend this money on because we built up so much early on. But you still, you want to just pull your schedule in. You don't want to plan a 35.5-month project in 36 months. So you just don't want to do that. So that's just a change in scope and change in thinking versus it's a construction project.
So let me ask you this. So after you go and you build your network, you have to get people to use it. I think you alluded to that a little bit. And you mentioned that maintaining institutions and how important it is to get the financing right, the pricing right, so you extract take rate and make it a sustainable network. Can we maybe talk a little bit about how you figure out that business model and how to price? And certainly working in rural communities, there's oftentimes some economic challenges and technology challenges that to drive adoption. Any thoughts on how important that part is to the overall project planning and sustainability, and any things that you've learned along the way that might be helpful to the audience?
Sure, yeah. Well, from the perspective of the K-12 market, pricing just got a lot easier starting this year. Item 21 information, which is when you actually bid on a E-rate project, all the pricing information now is transparent. The FCC just changed the rules, so you can see your competitors and what they're bidding now, and it's really going to drive down pricing dramatically. So we going back to the point about business models. I mean, really understand that the internet and land pricing has become such a commodity that we're seeing the price drop pretty dramatically in those markets, including in the rural communities, which is a good thing for the schools. Tough thing for the make a business, but I think really planning for those things is really important, so you don't overestimate your business plan.
So what I would suggest, you have to make sure you hire some people who actually come from the business or understand the business, because there's a lot to do in E-rate. There's a lot of paperwork, there's different licenses you need to get first, and to be able to work through it. And also what we've learned is it takes a while for people to trust you. If they have an existing provider, even if the provider isn't a very good provider or provides a tenth of what they say they're going to provide, which is what happens in our area, it takes a while. So you have to have somebody out there. When we did our first E-rate, we did about 22 bids. We ended up winning 2. Our second E-rate, we ended up getting 1 more customer. In this last E-rate cycle we just did, we got 50% of the customers we bid. And it was because we sent teams out and met with the schools ahead of time and made sure they've known us for a couple of years, even if we didn't get to work. And we understood that from that standpoint, but you have to have people focusing on that marketing relationship, and they have to understand in the beginning it's going to be very discouraging because no one's going to trust you. They're not going to know, and you have to get those first few customers on board. They'll get more trusting. They'll be your best marketing as your first customers. And so it's very, very important to understand that.
Okay.
So I think that what two lessons we've learned is, so we do have some overlap with the incumbent provider, Time Warner, and we will never compete on price, just period. We just won't go there. As Time Warner will continually undercut us. It's a good business model because they can afford the cash, but we just won't go there. And we've actually lost volunteer fire departments who are trying to get an extra, save $10 a month, and we just said we can't lower our price. We can happily make you a contribution, but if we start lowering our price, we'll lose them that one. The thing we win on in our model and why we get attract customers is that our local, we are part of the community. When you call customer service, you get Sylvia or Jeremy, or most people that know them anyway. But it's one of those towns where you dial the wrong number, you can still have a phone conversation. So, but knowing the customers who are entering some kind of new technology, they're not really sure. They're worried literally virus is going to come through that line and infect the family somehow. But when they call and they actually get the local person, and I mean local, like that town, not 3 towns over. Never mind a call center in somewhere else in the country or a call center outside the country. That is actually, people will pay extra for the knowing that it's a local person, not just the money, and it's also money going back into the local community, but it's really the local service. It's knowing people who have the same accent, you can actually have a chat with the customer service people about things going on in town. That's where we win.
I think the couple lessons learned is, first we did bring in some consultants on pricing, but then we had to modify that because we want access. Everyone has access. You do have to change the pricing, especially for the low and fixed income. So that's always kind of a work in process. But I agree with the local. And we would go to the Chamber of Commerce, any civic organization, and we started talking their lingo. A lot of people don't know what broadband is. They know what Netflix is. They know what YouTube is. We started to go to the schools to let them know that was coming. And then right now we do have an adoption rate of about 50%. What's happening as we're building the network out, people are coming to the service trucks now and saying, what are you doing at Joe's house? And he says, we're dropping the fiber drop so they can get the Carson internet. And most people ask if they can drop too. So it's that visual marketing that's getting us where we need to. But I think that community aspect, when you do make a call, you get someone local. And they probably can pronounce the name of the town correctly. They know who your dad was and that kind of stuff. And it really does make a difference in getting someone from outside of the area.
Okay. And I think we have time for probably like one question or one quick question. Who's got a quick question? Joel.
So we've talked about capital expenditure. I'm curious if you can share with us what your OpEx is now that you've got the system. Other than sustainability, there's always a cost to operate the network, your truck rolls, things like that. What have you found in the network that is now built and that cost for you on an annual basis?
Mine's about $2 million, about $1.5 million in payroll, and another $500,000 for some other expenses.
So I don't actually have a number per subscriber, but we as a private company, we have to run a sustainable business, and we have very, very good EBITDA in terms of earning before depreciation. And it's a good business. Fiber is rock solid once you put it up there. The maintenance is relatively low. We spend a lot more money on our 800 copper customers than we do on our 4,000 fiber customers in terms of maintenance.
Ours is about a couple $1 million, but we have an existing internet company that we basically are rolling over to take care of some of the fiber.
And when I was speaking for middle mile. I wasn't speaking about our wireless end mile, which is a much different animal altogether.
Well, thank you all for participating. Hopefully this was helpful to all of you, and do some good stuff and enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you.